What's going on, friends? This is Devin Hillsdon-Smith with Site Selectors Are People Too. Hope you all have had a great weekend. It's another start to the week. Another week, another opportunity to make a difference in our communities and for our clients. Last time, we're just going to jump into this. Last time we went over the life of a site selector, right? How do we as site selectors do what we do? What does a day in the life look like? What does it actually take to manage a project? Now, one thing we didn't talk about, and I made a note in the episode description section, we didn't talk about how site selectors are hired, how they get clients, how they get projects, how they get paid. That's going to be a whole separate episode. I think that topic is worthy of its own standalone episode. So we will get into that. But today we're going to flip it around and we're going to kind of go through the same format as last time for the life of a site selector. And I'm going to go on the Wayback Machine here and go back and put my economic developer hat on. And we're going to do today the life of an economic developer. I think this is going to be, well, let's just get into it here. So we've gone over what an economic developer is, right? Economic developers are those professionals that, their main purpose is to further economic growth within their respective communities. What's interesting, though, is that as an economic developer, you can work for a whole host of different types of organizations. The default organization that we think about would be quote unquote traditional economic developers working for either a state level economic development organization, a local level economic development organization, or in some areas, potentially a regional economic development organization. In that case, if you're at the state, you're typically hired on salary, and your pay comes either from the general fund of the state that the legislature appropriates, or through a specialized form of revenue, like certain states have, for example, in Ohio. However, at the local level, you're not typically hired on salary by the government entity that covers your jurisdiction. Sometimes you do have economic development directors embedded within cities or counties, but more often than not, you would work for a 501c6 nonprofit that is on contract with if you're a local economic development organization, with the county, maybe the cities and towns. If you're regional, this is all over the place, regional economic development organizations, but sometimes you are part of a chamber, right? A regional chamber. And so you're reliant upon investor dollars so that your salary can be paid. Sometimes you're a coalition of local economic development organizations that all contribute because they recognize regionalism is critical to further the overall economy of the region. And sometimes you're just a volunteer at the regional level. You're a local economic developer that's taken on the task of running a regional operation as well. And you're doing it because, again, you recognize the importance of regionalism. Now, there's other types of economic developers. Economic developers that are embedded within utilities, for example. That's a big one, right? Most electric utilities, natural gas utilities, will have economic development teams that exist to interface with the quote unquote traditional economic developers and work with them to ensure that their side of an RFI response, the provision of power, the provision of natural gas, to make sure that they are contributing effectively to win projects, right? If you work for a utility, typically you're covering multiple communities. You're probably covering, if not your entire service area, you're splitting that up so that your team is covering an entire service area. Some utilities such as Duke Energy, covers multiple states, right? And so then you have multiple directors of economic development charged with increasing opportunities within their respective states. Now, I don't want to forget about the fact that there's also economic developers working for various federal departments for the administration at the federal level, right? There's also individuals that their titles may not be economic developers, but there's folks on the private side, right? Business development professionals embedded within development firms and construction firms. There's economic development consultants who exist to advise economic development organizations or communities on economic development strategy. Sometimes they stand in as a contract economic development lead for a community. So it's a huge team, right, of individuals spread across multiple industries that are all working together to improve the economic well-being of their communities, jurisdictions, service areas, what have you. Today, we're going to focus in on pretty much the traditional side of economic development, right? Those individuals that are charged with the economic upholding and increasing the economic well-being of a specific community. That can be a state, that can be a county, a region. But I don't want us to forget about those folks that are working for the utilities and in professional services firms, for the feds. They're doing just as important work as the others. But for the sake of brevity today, which I am not known for, we're going to talk about more traditional economic development. So let's go ahead and explore that intricate and impactful work of economic developers, those professionals who drive community growth and prosperity day in and day out. If you just paid attention to the news headlines, economic developers are often perceived as individuals who merely just bring in business and collect the credit for it, right? However, that is, again, just like we talked last time with site selectors, right? You see the tip of the iceberg. For this one, that is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much work that goes into it. The role is multifaceted. It's essential. Their work involves, not just a straightforward job of bringing in business, but strategic planning, policy advocacy, community engagement, right? So one myth is that economic developers have a straightforward job. Not even close to true. Not even close to true. I just mentioned strategic planning, policy advocacy, and community engagement as three other areas that economic developers get pulled into, right? So let's dig into each one of those a little bit. Your local economic developer, when it comes to strategic planning, is typically charged with crafting long-term economic strategies tailored to local strengths and needs. So conducting SWOT analyses, developing comprehensive economic development plans that align with the community's vision and goals. You're trying to pull together all of the various competing yet complementary interests within your specific community to ensure that your planning for the future is not just a vanilla document, it's a living, breathing guide to how this community grows sustainably. As part of that, right, a lot of the times there are needs for a change in laws or change in policy. Economic developers get very much so in the weeds on policy advocacy, whether that be a statewide economic development association that lobbies the legislature. At the local level, it can be simply working with your government officials, your city council, your county commission, your mayor's office to shape policies that attract and retain businesses. Economic developers find themselves lobbying for business-friendly legislation, tax reforms, zoning law influences to support commercial development. Economic developers also find themselves defending against legislative initiatives that are not business-friendly or not common sense. We typically like to stay on the fiscal side of things, but if there's a certain social bill that's put into play in the legislature that could impact a community's ability to attract workforce, then economic developers will find themselves lobbying and defending against such legislation. So, yeah, strategic planning already, that is a full-time job, right, on behalf of the community. Then you get into the fact that you have to be versed enough to be able to go in and lobby for policy advocacy. A third pillar is community engagement, building relationships with local stakeholders to foster a collaborative growth environment. So that can be having meetings with key leaders in the community. If you recognize that the need for a new heavy haul connector road is critical for growth in a certain segment of your community, then you have to engage with not only local politicians, the roads department, potentially the state's Department of Transportation. You have to engage with professional services firms, engineering firms, construction firms, financing entities. It takes more than just saying, yeah, if we build that road, activity will come. It's about making the case and getting the community on the same page so that when that prospect does come to town and is looking at a site that would be served by that heavy haul road, for example, it's no longer just we'll figure it out, we'll build it. It's here's the plans, here's how we're going to do it. We've already figured this out. Everybody's on board. We've already had conversations with opposition. They support, right? So economic developers then will host public meetings, workshops, forums to gather input from residents and businesses, ensuring that development plans reflect the community's needs and aspirations. We talked in a prior episode about how a lot of the work that an economic developer does behind the scenes is, well, it's secretive in nature due to confidentiality needs. But there is an opportunity for the public to interact so long as the economic developer is hosting forums and giving the community an opportunity to weigh in on what direction the economic developer should be going, what industries the economic developer should be attracting or staying away from. Right? As a site selector, I don't like asking questions like, what are your targeted industries? I prefer to ask economic developers, what are those industries that are not going to fly in your community? Right? What are your no-nos? Where are your NIMBYisms? And for an economic developer to be able to answer that question effectively, they have to have listened to their community. You have to be proactive on that front. Because if you're reactive, trust me, it can go horribly. Right? Again, getting all the way through a project, making all of these promises to a prospect, saying how they're going to support that company's new investment. And then it's announced publicly and the community loses it. So it's important that an economic developer focus on community engagement. So this first myth versus reality that we went over, right? Economic developers having a straightforward job versus even just the three pillars that I referenced, all this other work they have to do behind the scenes: strategic planning, policy advocacy, community engagement. Economic developers are, to an extent, economic architects, right? So another myth versus reality. The first myth is that economic developers rely on gut feelings to make decisions, or they're only chasing headlines, right? Wrong. Again, I've been in the shoes of, I've been in those organizations, and it is not as simple as just chasing the numbers and chasing the headlines. Just like site selectors are heavily reliant upon data, economic developers are as well, just in a different way. Their decisions are still deeply rooted in data analysis and market research. For market research, economic developers, the good ones, analyze local, regional, national economic trends, including studying industry reports, labor market data, economic indicators to understand the competitive landscape and identify growth opportunities. Right? If you did want to answer that question that I don't ask, what are our targeted industries? You could very easily say things like, advanced manufacturing, semiconductor chip production, and automotive. Yep, well, you and everybody else, right? But what is your community truly primed and positioned for? And what is the best fit for the community? The only way to know that is to study, do your market research. Another area is data analysis. Utilizing economic models such as Implan to forecast growth and assess potential risks. Economic developers use tools like economic impact software, GIS mapping, predictive analytics, all of this to make informed decisions. It's not just about hosting community forums and listening to your partners and the leaders within the community. You are, as an economic developer, also you're looked upon as the expert when it comes to economic trends and growth forecasts and economic impacts, right? That is your bailiwick, where others will look to you and assume that you have done that work analyzing that data and that you're on top of it, that it's current. Another area that an economic developer makes their decisions, rooted in data analysis and market research would be something I already mentioned before, is impact studies. Conducting economic impact assessments to evaluate the benefits of proposed projects. These studies measure the potential economic benefits of a project, such as job creation, increased tax revenue, overall economic growth, and helps economic developers determine, first of all, is our toolkit of incentives modern enough to attract what we're looking for? Second of all, if we're talking to a prospect, what is our ROI, our return on investment? What's our cost benefit analysis? How much can we offer and still come out ahead, right? You don't want to give away the farm. You can't. If you give away more than the benefits that will be created by this new operation, unless you have some compelling reason otherwise, such as you can point to it's a catalytic effect for, a supply chain to come to town, or it's tackling a very tricky, blighted site in a very hard-hit neighborhood, you have to make sure that you don't go underwater with the amount of incentives you offer compared to the additional economic output from this new operation. So you have to be very data-driven. Another myth is that economic developers only work with large corporations, right? That's where the headlines come from. Now, that is true that a significant amount of an economic developer's work is rooted within responding to RFIs from site selectors that are representing large corporate interests, potentially looking to invest in their community. But in reality, economic developers also have to support a diverse range of projects, from small businesses to large industrial developments. For small businesses, economic developers have to provide resources and support to local entrepreneurs. This might include offering business coaching, facilitating access to financing, organizing network events, hosting ribbon cuttings when the new nail salon is opening up, right? If you don't have a strong ecosystem of small businesses in your community, you're not going to attract the large developments. And for good reason. You need to have a thriving community, and that is built upon small business activity, the health of the small business ecosystem. I can't say this enough. It's not about attracting the big mamma jamma automotive factory, right? Your key focus when it comes to your businesses is not attraction. It's expansion and retention of your existing companies. Period. And that includes your small businesses, your restaurants, your professional services firms. And that right there, if you have a small team in your economic development organization, that is enough for one person to focus on. Really, you need a team focused on small business and entrepreneurship. But that is a massive part of the world of economic development. Now, there are the large developments as well, where, as I mentioned, economic developers will coordinate with site selectors and corporations to bring major investments to the community. It can involve site selection assistance via RFI responses, helping to navigate regulatory requirements, securing infrastructure improvements. These are the more complicated one-offs, where it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, focus, expertise, responsiveness to win these types of projects. So it could be very easy for an economic developer to get pulled down this rabbit hole over and over and over again because that's where the headlines are. And let's be real, if you have a contract with the city, the mayor wants headlines. But you have to balance that with retention and expansion and your small business efforts. But the large developments take a lot of time, right? You get an RFI that comes in and you coordinate with your team, you coordinate with your partners, you get responses, you push back on those that aren't good enough, right? You serve as the scrum leader. You're the central point of contact. Maybe you then have to send it back to the state who then submits the site selector, or you submit it directly to the site selector. And then say you're fortunate enough to get a response. Well, then the company and the site selector, they're going to want more and more information. And you've already provided hundreds and hundreds of data points to them. Now they want to dig in. And oh man, now we're getting beyond the expertise of an economic developer, right? Talking about how the utility rates are structured, talking about how much it's going to cost to build a certain road through challenging terrain and topography. So you go through this back and forth, and it becomes slowly more of a negotiation. And then if you're lucky, they come to town for a site visit to actually see your community, see the site, have in-person discussions and negotiations, explain where they have heartburn or issues with whatever you've proposed as an economic developer. And this is the dance. This is the phase where you're kind of dating, trying to figure each other out, right? But if the project is real and moving fast, this can happen at a rapid clip, which means that you're hosting site visits, you're responding to requests for information, you're negotiating, you're reaching back out to your utility partners and saying, can we please find a way to get this rate lower? Can we find a way to bring the power to the site faster? State, listen, they're saying that we are one of the least competitive in the nation on this factor. What can we do? Getting creative. And then the final way that an economic developer serves as not just, a liaison with large corporations, large developments, is by establishing public-private partnerships, facilitating collaborations between the public and private sectors to drive developments. Now, these partnerships can lead to significant projects like mixed-use developments, transportation hubs, technology parks. This is creating the ecosystem, right? So it's not just about working with large corporations. That's part of it. Like I mentioned, large developments, RFIs. You have to focus in on your ecosystem, your small businesses, your public-private partnerships, even down to you don't have enough daycare facilities in your community. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to put together strategic responses to a lack of capacity when it comes to childcare in your community? So we're already painting the picture. Economic developers are pulled in a ridiculous number of directions. Not only do they have to be community focused, but let's go back to the whole large corporation side of things, right? You would think based on the headlines that economic developers have an easy time securing deals. Wrong. These negotiations, as I alluded to a little bit ago, are complex. They require diplomacy, patience, strategic thinking. You have to keep all of your partners engaged as you're waiting for the prospect to come back to you. And when the prospect comes back to you, guess what? They may have changed the scope of the project and you have to go back around again. You have to, it's about stakeholder alignment, balancing the interests of businesses, government, and the community. So it's going to require managing expectations and finding common ground to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes, right? At the end of the day, we are all site selectors and economic developers. We hate to lose. But you have to determine as an economic developer, if that big shiny project in front of you, if you secure it, is that going to be a win or is that going to be a loss? Is it the right fit for your community? So stakeholder alignment is a key component to securing deals. You also have to deal with incentives. You have to find ways so the company tells you this is what they're going to do. Here's our pressure points. Here's where we need to see how the community is going to support us if we're going to invest this much, create this many jobs. So as an economic developer, you have to secure tax incentives, grants, subsidies to attract businesses. If you're at the local level, like I said before, you're probably a nonprofit on contract with the community. And so you don't get to just sign off on a tax abatement. You have to navigate the process and support the project going in front of, let's call it city council, to ask for their authorization to offer tax abatement. So you have to secure the incentives. This involves negotiating with local and state governments to offer attractive incentive packages that make the community competitive. And so sometimes economic developers feel as though they're fighting against all fronts, right? They feel like they're trying to keep all sides together, pulling those ropes as tight as they can to keep everybody as close to centered as possible. You feel like at one moment you pick up the phone, the site selector is not pleased, or the company is not pleased with your offering, your potential offering for incentives. And so they're saying, dude, you're going to have to go back to leadership and figure this out. And you're going, oh gosh, all right, now I have an issue with the company. Well, crap, now I have to go back to the president of city council and see, can we even get this passed? So then the president of the city council is going, what are you doing? This is too rich, right? If they wanted to be here, they would be here. So you feel like you get stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's difficult. Oh, and by the way, you also have to secure agreements for the project. You have to help pave the way for negotiating terms of land use, land control, infrastructure development, utility development. Economic developers have to work to ensure that all parties are satisfied and that the development benefits the community as a whole. It can be challenging as an economic developer to determine what your role is when, for example, the prospect has been dealing with you day in and day out for the last couple of months. Well, now all of a sudden they're to the point where they need to have some very specific and hard conversations with the electric utility about capacities and about rate structures. At what point as an economic developer do you bow out and allow the private entities to negotiate with each other? Or do you stay involved as a mediator to ensure that nobody loses focus throughout the negotiations? It depends on the community, it depends on your role, it depends on all of the other dynamics. But that's a different way that economic developers have to serve as master negotiators. It is not an easy time securing these deals. Now we've talked about kind of the forward-facing, right? How an economic developer works with outside entities to attract them to their community. And so there's a myth out there that economic developers prioritize business interests and wins over community needs. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Economic developers' work is deeply rooted in enhancing community well-being. They work to create jobs, enhance quality of life, promote sustainability in their communities. For job creation, it's all about promoting projects that generate employment opportunities for local residents. Economic developers prioritize projects that create high-quality, sustainable jobs. It's not just about the headlines. It's not just about the wins. It's about quality wins. You don't go after every project that comes your way. Strong economic development organizations will have a matrix or a strategy that will help them determine, do we even compete for this project? And it's not the same for every community, right? Some communities might be very well positioned for brand new logistics hubs, right? They need those stable, yes, lower wage, lower skill jobs, but they need to create that foundation. Other communities already have enough. They are targeted due to global and national supply chains and their location in the country, targeted for more and more and more logistics. In those communities, the economic developers may have been issued an edict from their powers that be, or maybe they've determined through their own strategy plan sessions, that going after logistics jobs pure logistics is not the best fit because there's already too much in the community. And the community average wage is already above what a logistics operation would pay. So in that case, those would not be considered sustainable jobs. So it's different. Community creation and how you weigh community creation is different from community to community. And that's why an economic developer's work is deeply rooted in enhancing community well-being. There's also quality of life aspects, ensuring that developments contribute to the overall quality of life for residents in the community, including housing, education, healthcare. This might involve advocating for affordable housing, improving educational facilities, enhancing healthcare services. And then there's the sustainability side of things. Economic developers find themselves advocating for environmentally sustainable practices in projects. This includes promoting green building practices, renewable energy projects, sustainable transportation options. But again, it's going to depend on your own community. So I would contend that an economic developer cannot be successful in their job unless they are deeply integrated into their community and know what their communities want and need. But it takes a lot. The market research, the data analytics, the hosting community forums, listening to leaders. This is why I refer to economic developers as unsung heroes. Because the amount of work they do behind the scenes, it's so much more than you would ever believe from just reading the headlines. So, with that being said, we're going to go to break. And we're going to come back and I'm going to talk a little bit about why I loved doing what I did when I was an economic developer. And I think that some of these points are going to be common across all of my friends and colleagues in economic development. Talk to you soon. Okay, welcome back. By the way, I just noticed that the this little music reintro back into the program after a break, it starts with that. That just kind of made me jump a bit. I knew it was coming. If anybody else out there feels like they have to mute their headphones when I'm going to break, because that's just so darn distracting, let me know so I can change it up. It might also be because I'm sitting here listening to it with, noise canceling headphones on and it hits you real hard. But anyways, so why do economic developers love what they do? Despite all of the challenges, the headaches, constantly feeling like you're in the middle of others, constantly trying to get deals done, facing setbacks. The number one reason, and this is why I ended up loving it, and it's hard to find reasons that make sense for everybody, because as I've mentioned on a prior episode, economic developers come from all walks of life, and most economic developers don't really know what they're getting themselves into in their first economic development job. Right? By the second one, they probably do. By the third, yeah, likely. Which, by the way, economic developers are affectionately known as nomads with briefcases, because a lot of the times economic developers will move from community to community, right? Get their work done, and another opportunity will pop up. But despite the backgrounds, the difference in backgrounds of economic developers, I think we all do what we do because we have an opportunity to make a difference. Our work directly impacts our communities. Our work directly impacts our communities. By attracting new businesses, supporting local entrepreneurs, creating jobs, improving infrastructure, enhancing quality of life, economic developers help transform communities and contribute to long-term prosperity. As Bryant Niehoff put it on my Stories from the Road with him, he does what he does. He chose to be in his community. But he does what he does because he wants to make sure that when his daughters grow up and they have an opportunity to choose where they want to live, he wants to make sure his community is good enough for them as well. And that's powerful. Being in a position where you can shape the future of your community, I mean, it's your home. Right? Look outside your window right now and just think about your community. You have as an economic developer, the opportunity to shape its trajectory for decades to come because of the role that you're in. It's a powerful position to be in when you think about community legacy and impact. They leave a lasting legacy by transforming struggling areas into thriving economic hubs like the Studebaker facility in South Bend, Indiana, that's been turned into a technology center, revitalizing neighborhoods for future generations. Economic developers' efforts lead to lasting improvements in the local economy and in their fellow neighbors, residents, families' quality of life. I think another reason why we enjoy doing what we do as economic developers is you get the opportunity to solve complex problems. I think most economic developers, like site selectors, thrive on solving complex problems. Whether it's finding the perfect site for a new business, navigating regulatory hurdles, securing funding and incentives for community projects. Every project presents unique challenges that require innovative solutions. And guess what? You're the person. You are the person who needs to figure it out. You might not be the decision maker, but you are the person who needs to figure it out. And so you have an opportunity as an economic developer to think creatively, to find solutions that benefit both businesses and the community. Like I said, it might involve developing unique incentive packages, leveraging certain areas of technology, creating new partnership models that didn't exist before. And you have the opportunity to put your problem-solving skills to work for your community. Another reason economic developers love doing what they do, at least for me, this was a big one. I loved building relationships. Building relationships with a diverse group of stakeholders, including business leaders, government officials, community members, because I understood that those connections are essential for fostering a collaborative environment conducive to economic growth. It's about community engagement. I found fulfillment in engaging with the community, talking about what we were doing, what we were going after, where we were excelling, where we were struggling, understanding the community's needs, working with the community to achieve common goals. And this involves actively listening to community concerns and incorporating feedback into development plans. I also enjoyed all of the... I had an economic developer ask me one time in my role as a board member for the Indiana Economic Development Association, new economic developer, pulled me aside and said, Devin, how do I explain to my significant other that going out multiple times a week in the evenings for dinners or drinks or what have you is part of the job? Because it is, right? It's part of the job. And I didn't have a good answer for him. It's difficult because as an economic developer, your job is not 9 to 5. It's 9 to 5 plus. It's going out to events hosted by businesses. It's going out to community-centric events. It's, heck, when prospects are in town, taking them out for dinners. When politicians are in town, doing the same. It's part of the job, that networking side of things. Being seen, seeing others, getting to know one another. And a lot of the times that takes place over a dinner, over a cocktail, at an event. And those are in the evening. So I didn't have a good answer for that economic developer. But that is part of what I enjoy about the economic development profession is that networking side of things. Because you get to listen to people and learn what they're all about. And all of a sudden, every once in a while, you have those aha moments where it lights a fire and a new initiative is born. And the fourth reason I think most economic developers love being economic developers is because they get to witness tangible results. There is immense satisfaction in seeing the tangible results of your efforts. from groundbreaking ceremonies to ribbon cuttings. You can see the direct impact of your work on the community. There was nothing more fulfilling to me when I was at my last gig at the industrial park, when you'd go through all of the rigmarole of negotiating, trying to get something done. And some folks would say, well, Devin, the project's announced. Like, surely you can breathe easy now. No, I'll breathe easy when they close on the land. Oh, okay. Then they close on the land. Devin, you can breathe easy now. I'll feel better when I start seeing them turn dirt. Then they start turning dirt. Devin, are you satisfied yet? I'm not until I see that building going up. Got it. Satisfied? Not until I see them in operation. Right? You never know if a project's going to break down at any point. For me, the most fulfilling and satisfying moment is when you cut the ribbon and you start to see some of those employees that are working at that facility standing around. When you realize that those individuals now have potentially better jobs and better livelihoods and a better future for their family because of the work that you've done. And so we celebrate the success stories of businesses that we've helped to establish and grow, knowing that we've played a crucial role in those achievements. These stories highlight the positive changes we've helped bring about, right? It's sometimes hard to remember when you're stuck in the paperwork that the person down the street from you might be going through a tough time. And if only there was another opportunity in the community to put their skill set to use, they might not have to make some very difficult decisions. But what if simply by way of the work that you're doing, day in and day out, you can ensure that individuals like that, the guy that you pass driving down the street every morning, that he can go from a place of despair to a place of opportunity. It's a cool thing, folks. It's a very, very fulfilling position to be in. So I think that is why economic developers do what they do. All right, we're going to take one more break here, and we're going to come back and do a day in the life of an economic developer. See you in a sec. All right, we're back. Let's talk about the day in the life, right? So we did this before with site selectors. I will tell you as an economic developer, no day was the same. You would typically wake up assuming you think you know how the day is going to go, and you open up your emails and see that there's 3 different emergencies that you have to triage that came in overnight. So a lot of the time, the day of an economic developer is reactionary. That can be very difficult for some individuals, but as long as you know how to organize your time properly, you can still slog your way through the day as distractions come up. You're in a position with site selectors where you're typically in a hold and wait period until they ask for something, and then it's all hands on deck. So if you don't know when those requests are going to come through, you don't really know how to plan for them. So at least for me, a day in the life would have been kind of similar to what I mentioned for site selectors, right? Start the day trying to get your bearings. Maybe check the local newspapers, media sources, see what's going on. Clear out your inbox. Check off items from your whiteboard to make sure that you're up to date on your task list. Just getting your bearings, right? And not as many meetings and calls as I have these days as a site selector, but getting prepped for who's coming in to talk to us. Where am I going today, and who's my audience going to be? Do I need to be prepared for a media interview? Do I need to be prepared to speak to an advocacy group? Do I need to be prepared for a site visit that's coming in? All of that being said, you get prepared, but a lot of the times then my day, I went straight into project management mode. So opening up those active projects in my pipeline, those projects that were looking at my community. And for those RFIs we hadn't finished yet, following up with partners, checking to make sure that they were on task, making sure I was on task as well. It was about pulling together resources. And a lot of times I meant just picking up the phone and calling and shooting off emails and just pure project management. Well, but then you always have to pivot to the point where you're looking at non-project, non-economic development, site selector project work. And in that regard, that's where it's about building your database, building your institutional knowledge, looking at how things are done and figuring out a new way to do them. And sometimes that meant you had to take a look at the fact that your incentive process was flawed. And you have to sit down and determine how you're going to approach it. So drafting up white papers, doing research, checking in to make sure that the direction you're going isn't completely off base, pulling in members of your team to have collaborative discussions on marketing efforts. Gosh, that's another area we didn't even get into, is the fact that almost every economic development organization has a marketing effort to ensure that they're known beyond the bounds of their community, as well as within their community. I used to direct my public communications firm that our number one audience, because of what we did, was folks outside of our community. Because where I was at, most people within the community knew who we were and what we did. But I also told them that we can't forget we have another audience, and that's the community itself. So there's different ways that you have to message what's going on based on who your audience is. Marketing. That's a fantastic topic for us to touch base on another time. How do you market and get the attention of site selectors and corporate decision makers? Is it through print advertising? Is it through geo-fenced digital advertising? Yeah, we're going to get into that. Anyways, back to the day in the life. Again, no day is the same. It's getting your bearings, going through project management, filling out those spreadsheets for RFIs and drafting cover letters. It's going through long-term strategic planning initiatives and continuous improvement initiatives. It's meeting with partners and determining what's it going to take to get a certain piece of legislation passed. How do we ensure that with this project that we're not going to run into any hurdles with city council trying to get the tax abatement? Have we had a conversation recently with the landowner of that priority site that we keep putting in front of prospects, but we don't have control over it? Well, darn it, the last time we talked to the owner was 3 months ago. Probably want to touch base again. And we need to do it in such a way that, we don't scare them off and we don't set the wrong expectations. But yeah, okay, we need to talk to that site owner again. And, you know what? We need to check in on that transmission line project that the utility company is putting together. I wonder if that issue that we thought was going to arise, if we're anywhere closer to that finally festering. And then, hey, shoot, guys, I have to go. I'm supposed to be at lunch with so-and-so in 10 minutes. It's going to take 15 minutes to get there. It's a little bit of a personal dig. I was always late to meetings because I would sit there talking, look at my watch and go, yeah, I'm not going to get there in time. But even when you have that moment for a break in the middle of the day, typically that's not time for yourself. That's a point at which you have an opportunity to go meet with somebody else over lunch and either get to know them or rekindle your relationship or maintain your relationship. Or maybe that's an opportunity for you to ask for a favor, or that you're walking into that with them wanting to ask you for a favor. A lot of the work as well was fielding and responding to inquiries from local contractors, local professional firms that wanted to find ways to get more involved. How do we, as a local earth-moving contractor, ensure that when you announce a new project coming to town, that we can be considered? How do you respond to that question from a business in your community that just wants a piece of an opportunity to compete when you can't even talk about your projects. And by the way, economic developers do not control access to construction management teams for the projects that come to town. That was always a misconception that I found wherever I've operated, that folks assume that simply because I'm the one announcing a project, that if they reached out and they were an IT provider, that we could get them in with the right folks with the company so that they could provide all of their IT solutions. Nope. Typically, the team that I'm dealing with as an economic developer, as soon as they're done helping to make the decision to come to your community, they're off to the next one. There's a whole separate team that I've never met before coming to town. So how do you create relationships with those facility planning and construction management teams? So I'm going to leave it at this. If you're a site selector or somebody completely outside of the profession, remember how complicated and critical the work is for an economic developer. Don't assume they just exist to respond to your RFIs. Don't assume they exist to win headlines about project announcements. It's so much deeper than that. And there's so much work that's done. To economic developers, thank you. I know what you go through. It is difficult. People think that your news is always good news and you're always just getting a pat on the back, but I know that behind the scenes, you're constantly being yelled at, criticized, challenged. You're facing your own insecurities as you're trying to make the right decision over and over and over again. So, with that being said, this has been another long podcast episode, but I hope this has been enlightening. I hope I got it right. If anybody has any comments or questions or concerns for me, you know how to reach me. If you don't, just look me up on LinkedIn, Devin Hillsdon-Smith. Shoot me a message. Send me a request with the subject line, site selectors are people too, and let me know you have a question. Or you can go to the Facebook page. I still haven't created that email. Still not sure about that one yet. Another email to manage, but anyways, I appreciate your time. I know that everybody just spent, 53 minutes listening to me ramble, but it's so important for us to understand what professionals in this industry go through. Because if you don't understand the other side of the table, you're never going to treat them like people. And at the end of the day, I'm going to flip it around here. Don't forget, those unsung heroes in our community, economic developers, are people too. See you next time. Bye. Just a heads up, views expressed in this podcast are solely my own and are not attributable to any employers, whether past or present. Thank you.